to this webinar organized by Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. We have the pleasure of having with us today Professor K. Varigu, who is a senior fellow at NMML, and he is giving his lecture on China's policy in Xinjiang. As we all know, this is an extremely important subject for our times. For a number of years, China has been following a highly repressive policy in the Xinjiang province, which on paper is a relatively autonomous region of the People's Republic of China. But in reality, the kind of policies that the Chinese state has been following in the Xinjiang province actually not only erode whatever pretense of autonomy it may have earlier given to the province, but is also responsible for committing very serious human rights violations of the people of the province, who are mainly Uyghurs. We know that various kinds of discrimination has been practiced against the Uyghurs for a very long time. However, in the last few years, things have taken a turn for the worse. Today, we have a situation in which more than 1 million Uyghurs belonging to the Xinjiang province have been herded by the Chinese state into what they describe as re-education camps. Basically, it is an attempt to forcibly indoctrinate the people into giving up their culture, their values, etc., etc., and basically make them into replicas of the majority Han population. So all kinds of violations of the rights of the people of the Xinjiang province have been committed by the authorities in the last few years. And there is no doubt that the international reaction to what has been happening in the Xinjiang province is not what it should have been because of various reasons. Only a few countries around the world have been serious in raising the plight of the Uyghurs of the Xinjiang province. But the fact is that from an academic point of view also, the situation in the Xinjiang province of China is very, very important. And as I said, that today we have one of the biggest authorities in India on the subject of Kashmir and Central Asia with us, Professor K. Variku, who retired from Jawaharlal Nehru University as a professor and who is now a senior fellow here. So we are delighted to have him here, as I said earlier. And now, without further delay, I would request Professor Variku to proceed with his lecture.
Thank you, Dr. Mishra. It is a great pleasure for me to be here and speak on Xinjiang. I started my studies on Xinjiang in 1979, but I had the first opportunity of traveling to Xinjiang by road for about a month in May and June 1994. Later, I followed with I could get one or two opportunities for brief visits. But in June 2010, I was able to go there and I covered southern Xinjiang for my field study. And June 2011, I covered northern Xinjiang for my field study. And later, a book which is known as China's Northwest Frontier. It was published by Routledge in 2016. It gives a broad perspective on Xinjiang, its intricate relationship with China, its relationship with China, and policies, plus its relationship with Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, and adjoining Central Asian republics. Today, I would like to focus on, because for quite some time, Xinjiang has been the focus of international attention, mainly after the current president Xi Jinping assumed power in March 2013, and from 2014 onwards, harsh and very stringent policies were adopted in Xinjiang what they call as to curb or contain three evils: extremism, terrorism, and separatism. So, but now for the last 2 3 years, these policies have been taken further in the form of what they call as re-education camps, and which are actually internment of blacks. That is about 1 million Uyghurs are interned, and they have been put in re-education camps. Plus, there is a lot of digital security surveillance. There are so many curbs there on religious freedom. Recent reports by Australian Security Policy Institute have revealed that around 8,500 mosques have been demolished. So today I will not only I will wind up by the current governments, but I will start a larger. I will give you a broader perspective from the beginning. Xinjiang is very crucial and important strategic region of China. And China has been, after the disintegration of Central Asian republics, the disintegration of former Soviet Union, and independence of Central Asian republics, China has been assiduously developing Xinjiang as the hub of trans-Asian trade and traffic. Xinjiang is also vital for China's quest for energy security because it holds a lot of oil reserves. And China views Xinjiang as a continental bridge which extends China's reach to Central Asia and also serves as a security buffer to China proper. It is also a site for nuclear testing in Luktor and huge petroleum and mineral reserves and immense agricultural potential. Most of China's cotton and tomatoes are grown in Xinjiang province, and which are tomatoes about 700,000 tons of tomatoes are exported to other countries. So China has been following a time-tested policy of large-scale Han settlement in Xinjiang, what they call as a means to work towards regional stability and bring new Central Asian republics and peoples of Xinjiang closer to China's worldview. But this policy of Han settlement started essentially since Qing rule, that is, since 1750s, and it has continued uninterrupted in various forms. Qings had started the system of military agrarian settlements in Xinjiang because those days population was very sparse in Xinjiang, huge land available. So they brought in people who would serve as a Chinese military, and they would also work on agriculture so that they could produce food resources and locally using local resources. They, through 1980s and 1990s, there were numerous violent incidents in Xinjiang, including bomb blasts, arson, racial attacks, and hate campaign by the Uyghur separatists against China's rule. And the growing Uyghur resistance to Chinese domination has been spearheaded by East Turkestan Islamic movement, but World Uyghur Congress. And the growing Uyghur demand for a separate homeland has been receiving international attention, not so much as Tibet has been in the limelight, but for the past few years it has been receiving some attention from the West. On its part, Chinese government is very conscious of the threat and has been pursuing a strident policy of curbing what they call as three evils of separatism, religious extremism, and terrorism. On the other plane, China has also launched a slew of measures to uplift economically underdeveloped region and bring non-Han minorities into national mainstream. So my presentation is actually based on my long term studies of the region, but also my personal field study in the region in 2010 and 2011, and also in 1994. These have factored in this presentation because that has enabled me to peep through and see through the implementation of the Chinese policy on the ground. Way back in 1955, China declared Xinjiang as Uyghur Autonomous Region as a sort of recognizing the Uyghur Muslim minority there. But at the same time, it also established autonomous prefectures for Kazakh, Hui, Kyrgyz, and Mongol populated areas, and autonomous counties for Kazakh, Hui, Mongolian, Tajik, and Simbu dominated areas. That means, whereas nominally it accepted that Uyghurs are in minority, are the main minority there, but at the same time it created new structures, autonomous structures within the Xinjiang government that would protect the identity and the aspirations of other minorities, that is Kazakhs. It is a very Chinese have fine-tuned this autonomy model in Xinjiang, and they have provided direct, or should I say, protection to these non-Uyghur minorities. So the regional concentration of various ethnic religious minority groups has been consolidated by the Chinese policy of creating separative administrative divisions as autonomous prefectures, autonomous counties, and towns within prefectures where a particular ethnic or religious group is in majority. In this manner, China has set up adequate administrative mechanisms to take care of non-Uyghur minority nationalities in Xinjiang. And China has successfully followed the policy of Han settlement in Xinjiang as a means towards social and political stability and territorial integrity. This planned immigration and settlement of Hans, Huis, and others from mainland China resulted in increase of the share of Han population from 6% in 1953 to about 40% in 2008-2009. And it resulted in the sharp reduction of Uyghur population from 80% in 1941 to about 46% in 2007. There have been determined efforts by Uyghur Islamic radicals, where they are in majority, to intimidate and shoo away the Han settlers in Xinjiang. One such example was when July 2009 riots took place in Urumqi. Many Huns were, targeted, but the authorities never allowed this to be successful. Authorities not only foiled all such attempts, but reinforced the Han presence in Xinjiang. Now, if they have equalized the Hans and Uyghur population in northern Xinjiang mainly, but the southern Xinjiang still remains an issue of concern for China, because though Uyghurs are 46% in overall Xinjiang region, but they constitute over 80% in southern Xinjiang, and which is the source of trouble for Chinese. Now, as I said, that various non-Uyghur ethnic groups and those Muslims, they are settled in various regions, like Kyrgyz are settled in Kyzyl prefecture, Tajiks are settled in mountainous Tashkurgan county, Mongols, Kazakhs, and Huis live in their distinct traditional habitats in northern Xinjiang. There is Mori Kazakh Autonomous County of the Changji Hui Autonomous Prefecture. There is Barkol Kazakh Autonomous County of Hami Prefecture. Then Muslim Kazakhs are concentrated in Ili Kazakh Autonomous Prefecture, and Mongols live mainly in Bayangoli and Bortala Mongol Autonomous Prefectures. And these divisions were ethno-linguistic divisions were created in 1954. That is 1 year before Xinjiang was declared Uyghur Autonomous Region. So we should give credit to the long-term Chinese vision and wisdom of handling the potentially troubled regions. So they know where we having those Kashmir is fountainhead of Indian culture. It is everything in there is all Indian. Here I have traveled all through Xinjiang. Hardly any Sinic or Chinese influence or presence or any artifact or any physical or historical or archaeological presence. But what they have done, I was surprised. In one canyon, they have they have branded various places like flaming mountains. There are sand dunes, much better sand dunes in Rajasthan, Gujarat. They create branded it as flaming mountain in Turfan. So many tourists come there. Similarly, in Kenyan, northern Xinjiang, one canyon. So I thought that they showed me curiously. This is Mao Zedong, the mountain, a rock with a nose, or whether they have carved it like that. So it is titled as the Mao Zedong. Other is titled as Chaunlai. And this is how they are trying to implant Chinese symbols on the region where there is physical. From the cultural and racial point of view, Uyghurs and other Muslim groups like Kazakhs and Kyrgyz belong to Turkic Islamic group, and they see Chinese Huns and even Chinese Huis are Muslims mix. These Chinese Huis they don't take pork, but they speak Mandarin and they eat Chinese food, excepting pork. So the local Muslims speak Turkic, Uyghur, Kazakh, Kyrgyz languages, and Chinese Huns and Huis speak Mandarin. There is a huge communication gap between Han Chinese and local Turkic racial groups. All Uyghur, Kazakh, Kyrgyz Muslims in Xinjiang observe local Xinjiang time, which is 2 hours behind the Beijing time. It is in marked contrast to various offices and institutions and Han Chinese people in Xinjiang who observe Beijing time. Now you see racially how much and culturally how much they are distant. Very few Uyghurs and Kazakhs can speak Chinese, and few Chinese know the local language. Now, though China is making concerted efforts to introduce teaching of Chinese among the local Uyghurs and Kazakhs and others, and local languages among the Chinese ones. Now there is a rethink among the Chinese scholars also, because Chinese nationalist policy was founded on the model of Soviet Marxist-Leninist theory of nationality. Now they argue that the Chinese Communist Party adopted the Soviet nationality policy, but they believe that the special policies and concessions in terms of family planning, that is, the local groups can have 2 children or 3 children, whereas Han can have only one, or university admissions, administrative positions, dual school system, favoring ethnic minorities in China. The scholars and the policy analysts, they believe that these are the roots of ethnic conflict, because these have only strengthened and politicized minority group identity. So they want that this. Now I will discuss that how China is trying to, have its solid consolidated control over the region. There is a racial divide, there is an ethnic divide, ideological divide. Nobody can deny it. So Chinese know it fully well, but they are devising ways and means to, they cannot bridge it. They say that we have a policy of assimilation of Muslims, like forceful integration of Uyghur Muslims or Kazakhs. But the problem is that is further deepening the divide instead of bringing them closer ideologically. July 2009 riots in Urumqi, it came as a rude shock to Beijing. China's response was swift, tough, and calibrated, taking security measures to control situation, detaining hundreds of people, summary trials, executions, restricting internet telephone communication, controlling flow of information, and taking steps, most of all, to reassure Han Chinese settlers in Xinjiang, Urumqi, and other places for their safety, and reaching out at the same time to pliable Muslim countries in Central Asia, South Asia. If you see today, most of the Middle East and Africa and Pakistan, South Asia, and also Central Asian countries, they endorse not only one China policy, but they also support China's policies and programs in against the Uyghurs or Kazakh Muslims in Xinjiang. Though Central Asian Muslims are ethnically brothers, ethnic brothers and compatriots of Kazakhs and Uyghurs. Soon after the 2009 riots in Urumqi, China organized a big conference, high-level conference on 17-19 May 2010. I happened to be in Beijing at that time, so I could, monitor and get through what was coming in. The conference was addressed by President Hu Jintao, Prime Minister Wen Jiabao. They realized that there is a gap between Xinjiang and the rest of the country. So now they they admitted that there is the gap in GDP growth in Xinjiang and rest of China. So the conference emphasized the importance of social stability, national unity. Now they urged the Chinese banks to invest in Xinjiang. And a new development policy was announced in Xinjiang. Now, earlier, all fuel, that is oil and gas, was taken just extracted from Xinjiang without giving any royalty or without giving any fee. Now they decided to charge resource tax of 5% on oil and gas produced in Xinjiang to boost Xinjiang's physical revenue by 25%. So that is around 5 billion yuan at that moment would add to for oil and 2 billion yuan for gas per year would be used for development projects in Xinjiang. At the time, I remember that they had installed 50,000 CCTVs in Urumqi. Today, it is everywhere to monitor movements of suspect Uyghur and other activists. On diplomatic front, China not only warded off any Islamic criticism of its policies in Xinjiang, but has succeeded in having its positions legitimized and endorsed by Muslim countries like Iran, Pakistan, Central Asian republics, and other Middle East countries. Even Turkey, where there is a very strong population of Uyghurs, immigrants settled in Turkey, they have also endorsed China's policy in Xinjiang. So now, at the other end, China is taking steps to strengthen or promote economic development in China, in Xinjiang. Now, another issue is I will later show you the slides which I took photographs, which would. Another important measure has been taken is eliminate Uyghur Muslim ghettos or clusters, which have been found to be source of such religious extremism and separatism. Many old houses in southern Xinjiang have been demolished to create big spaces, parks, roads, and construction of high-rise residential buildings. Concerned families are allotted flats in these buildings in a proportionate manner so that the particular high-rise building has an admixture of various communities which have equal stake in safety, security, welfare of their residential complex. Thus, this complex remains immune to any rights outside the complex. Understand this? In Kashgar Old city, about 2,200 Uyghur families, about 10,000 people. I visited there. They lived during my visit in June 2010 in mud houses, old traditional houses. Some were falling, but the government demolished them to create more open space and multi-storied apartments. Now, at the time, they decided that we will develop Kashgar as Shenzhen, second Shenzhen, which is the most advanced region in China. The idea is the Shenzhen, it can be built as Shenzhen only through massive import of Han specialists, Han cadres, Han scientists, or Han workers. So the region, the South Xinjiang, which is presently Uyghur dominated, around 80% domination, it will turn into, it will be homogenized in a in a in a few years time. I visited Eidgah Mosque in Kashgar, June 2010. I had visited it in 1994, and I found that all old and crowded Uyghur shops and slums around this mosque had been cleared. It was clean, calm, peaceful surroundings with new shops, multi-storied commercial complexes. And in Beijing, where I was staying, nearby, Beijing National Library is nearby. So I was walking, so a Chinese scholar was with me. I didn't know, so we crossed a foot-over bridge near library. Then I will show you the photo. She showed me that this is the foot-over bridge. Across the bridge, many Uyghur students, because there is a Minzu University, Nationalities University in Beijing nearby, so there all minority nationalities study in that university. So they stayed, because while they study there, they were staying in nominal rented, rather less price rented accommodations, which were there across the bridge. So this was a sort of Xinjiang, it was known as Xinjiang Street, near the Central University of Nationalities. And it was cheaper area to live for Uyghur students and families. And they had put up a poster on this bridge showing that the two that the Uyghur pickpockets are pestering people on this. It was put up a police, and then must be the problem must be there, but they you see that how they removed the problem. They removed the evil in the bud. They demolished all these low cost houses and clusters across the bridge, and they acquired land and houses surround there, built new multi-story residential buildings, which were too expensive and out of reach of the students and Uyghurs. So now Xinjiang street doesn't exist anymore, and the problem is removed once for all. So this is the Chinese ingenious way of dealing with the problem. Now, as I said, Australian Strategic Policy Institute has come out with a study recently stating that 8,500 mosques across Xinjiang have been demolished since 2017. The Since particularly after Xi Jinping came to power in March 2013, China employed tough measures in Xinjiang to ensure what they call state security, ethnic unity, and social stability. In March 2014, China launched its Strike Hard campaign against violent extremism in Xinjiang. Now, as I said, 1 million Uyghurs have been put in what they call re-education camps, but these are actually detention camps where they train them, impart political education, ideological training, Mandarin training, Chinese flag raising ceremonies, and in trying to inculcate in them the ideological basis of Chinese unity and one China nation. Biometric data, voice simple samples, DNA testing of local peoples have been done to identify, profile, and track the activists in Xinjiang. Hajj pilgrimage is organized by state. People are not allowed to mix religion with education, and parents and teachers have been asked to keep their children away from religious teaching. There is strict control over internet. In March 2017, a law was passed in Xinjiang to curb extremism, discouraging wearing veils and beards. Now, what they said, don't have abnormal beards. Here it is interesting. I was in Kazakhstan 2 years back, Astana. There also informally, Kazakh police and state agencies they don't trust them like this, do this, but informally go to houses, follow, don't mix religion with politics. It is your private affair. Follow it, calmly and silently in your homes, and don't have abnormal beard. I had heard this abnormal word there also in Kazakhstan. And in Tajikistan, few years back, I don't know now, they had also this practice of not allowing veils in schools. Textbooks have been revised to have a correct understanding of history, and so I would like to go because that the physically seeing the situation through pictures may give you a correct view. This is 2010-2011. This is the express highway, the elaborate communication network. We are building train to connect Kashmir with Delhi now. Only it is a 3-4 year back, or Rohtang Manali tunnel now. But this was the communication structures in railway, road, airports. These were initiated way back in 1950s. So there is a huge mind gap between our planning and between theirs. Next, this is the highway. You see, these are the wind energies. Urumqi Turfan Express Highway. These are the buildings in Kashgar region. अभी दिल्ली में very few such buildings, and this is 10 years back. So today must be more developed. So this was showing because donkey was used to be the popular mode of transport in Kashgar, and the Uyghurs now, and the ladies are driving their bikes. And next, this is again saying Uyghurs. They are the Uyghurs in next. This is the Kashgar railway station. Next, ये दिखाना थोड़ा सा नीचे नीचे नहीं ऊपर वाला Chinese restaurant Karaku Lake, because Karaku Lake is near the palm. Is I had an opportunity to visit there. From Karaku Lake you go to Tashkurgan, and from Tashkurgan you go to Sust and enter Pakistan into Gilgit. Now this is a very strategic point because this is on the frontier. This I didn't imagine there. I only imagined that there is nobody inside. A heavy built Chinese lady and another one or two persons are there, nothing much to offer. So when I came here, so I showed some, he has passed away, General Hriday Kohl, he was his vice chief of army. I just showed him that he asked me, what did you see? I showed him, he said it is the satellite on the, he recognized it. It is their communication Now, then I recollected that hefty lady. They were keeping a watch because that is the road, highway. It is on the highway going to Pakistan. Next, these are Science and Technology Center in Urumqi. Next, very much developed. These are again the same. In 2010, I saw a level being where I was staying. Saw the level being, ground being leveled for building another for constructing a heavy high-rise building. And when in June 2011 I went, it was complete. Next, this is a traditional Uyghur home in Kashgar. Next, this way I was saying that they have demolished these houses. Next, this is what they are demolishing, and then there may be a photo of newly built buildings. Next, yeah, these are the new buildings constructed for these people, where they will keep them, but they will not turn and keep allot it only to Uyghurs. They will make it administrative mixture. Next, this is the Kashgar Mosque. It was so crowded. This has been beautified. Eidgah Mosque. This is the only Jamia Mosque like our Jamia Masjid. It's a very small matlab. Next, yeah, this is the famous Eidgah Mosque. It was closed. So when General Ziaullah visited there, and he opened the lock of the mosque. This again adjoining near the Eidgah Mosque, they have developed market complex. This was the idea that how they have cleaned and these are the Carrefour, that is Prime Department Store, and so many department stores there through Xinjiang. It is in Urumqi. This is the police warning against Uyghur pickpockets of Goto footbridge near National Library Beijing. So I took the photo. Maybe now it may not be there. It was 2010. And this is the now they are installing these inscriptions in Chinese. They show that it is ancient, it is Chinese. Well, you see, it is a new stone. है कुछ नहीं, but अब they are creating their history, their presence. Next, again, promote our Chinese civilization, love our beautiful rivers and mountains. It is at the Heaven Lake, famous Urumqi. Again, similar boards. Next, this is the ancient Kariz underground water channel. So this was the system of irrigation in those deserts, but they have preserved this as a symbol of protecting ancient culture. Next. This is a grape valley. Turfan is famous for grapes, so they created a sort of tourist spot. Next. ये फ्लेमिंग माउंटेन्स के पास वहाँ मंकी जैसे हनुमान and other Buddha वगैरह they have kept and to attract people, and mostly tourists from Taiwan, Hong Kong and mainland China come. मेरे ख्याल में 150 million tourists have visited. They are trying to assimilate, integrate. This is a bookshop, Xinhua bookstore, multi-story building. All books in Chinese books translated in Uyghur, Kazakh, Manchu, Cebu, and other languages. Uyghur. Next. It is a Kucha. Yes. Kucha is the Kumarji की जगह है वहाँ पर Kumarji was there. These are traditional stores and traditional, items peculiar to Uyghurs. Next. Okay, this is the national stadium. Even though Olympic Games were finished, but the stadium were humming with activity. So that day, one Uyghur artist, he was making a rope walk from this end to that end. So they have engaged these Uyghur artists. They were performing. 100 yuan was the fees ticket for, and it is self-generating. नहीं ये क्या कहते हैं revenue. Next, again same Uyghur artist performing. Next, हाँ this is इसका नीचे heading होगा एक the Alashenko border. Now you see their policy towards Central Asian neighbors is first important step what they took. They negotiated the border settlement. They claimed suppose 2,000 square kilometers. Finally, they agreed on 1,000 square kilometers. Allah took more from them, but they also, the Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, they agreed, okay, Balatal gayi, and they demarcated. Now, what Chinese did, they set up border players. You can see this is an older stone with an inscription. This was our Tang dynasty, or this was here. They are demonstrating their physical presence through the erection of these stones. These are not ancient, but these have been implanted. Chalo, next. This is Khargos, I think. Another. This is the Xinjiang Kazakhstan border pillar. So there is no confusion. There will be no confusion between Kazakhstan. Huge wires and huge walls have been erected and border pillars have been erected. Next. Again, this Khargos. Another border point, Khargos. There is this inscription, old inscription. Next. You see, this is a Beijing duck restaurant. This is the model. So they are sinicizing the food in Xinjiang. This same model, it is a famous Beijing duck restaurant in Beijing. So the same model, because my host, they took me into this restaurant. So every day, duck is being flown from Beijing to Urumqi for cooking in this. So very famous now. Next, I think okay. So this is a way. This was physically through slides and through pictures which have been taken by me, and now it was God's an opportunity for me to go and to see. Now, not possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Variku, for your very, very insightful and empirically based lecture on this important subject. We are now open to questions and comments from all the participants. You can either ask the question directly or you can raise your hand. I will then ask you to go ahead with your question.
हाँ वारिकू सर नमस्कार
Please identify yourself.
हाँ रवि जी नमस्कार
नमस्कार
सर मेरा छोटा सा क्वेश्चन है कि व्हाट इज द सिमिलरिटी बिटवीन सिंकियांग एंड कश्मीर सिचुएशन एंड हाउ टू हैंडल दिस सिचुएशन
Actually, I had no time in detailing that. This chapter, this is part of my study which I am doing at Tinmurti, and this chapter will be China's policy in Xinjiang compared to Indian experience in Kashmir. So there are a lot of similarities. I hinted only few, but approach is different because we are a democratic country. They are a communist country. Command and control is there, and what they decide in Beijing is implemented 100%. There is no deviation from any side. But what I said, they are recreating their cultural symbols Though there are none, but our Kashmir is full, 100%. The fountain of Indian civilization, archaeological finds, temples, shrines. But our country, our democratic system has ignored that, and there three, 400 temples have been destroyed, while as so many other things have been destroyed. So
जी.
no, it has to be a consciousness among the people of India that how we have to save our precious and ancient glorious heritage, irrespective of which religion it belongs to. So once we realize that our mistakes and take corrective steps, things will follow.
Thank
Yes.
you, sir.
Any other question? Any other question? All right. Then I have one small question of my own, Professor Variku. You see that the larger question with regard to China's policy about its what I would describe as the civilizational periphery is the really important question. Now we know that in during some periods of Chinese history, these regions, Tibet, Xinjiang, and Inner Mongolia, and etc., etc., they were part of a larger Chinese empire, which, to the best of my knowledge, was founded by a foreign power in the first place. But the foreign power, to various degrees, assimilated itself and founded a Chinese empire, which was based in Chinese heartland, but which extended to Central Asia and Tibet, etc., etc. Now, China, to my mind, is the most striking example of a country that is willing to sort of exert its power and authority not only over the borders which it has had for most of its history, but also the borders which some other regions, which for brief periods of its history, it may have been a part of, as a larger empire. Uh, Tibet, of course, is an example. Xinjiang is an example, because the anxiety in the Chinese state is, and as you rightly pointed out, it's a highly authoritarian communist state. The anxiety in the Chinese state is to assimilate all these border regions, civilizational periphery, and sinify them, and consolidate the Han influence there. I think that it's part of that larger plan, and as we can see very well, now in the last few years, as far as Xinjiang province is concerned, it has progressed to a very, very great extent. So as I can see it, one, there is a specific problem in this province, but two, there is a larger Chinese response of signification of its civilizational periphery. So, how do you think? What do you think is a possible response that the international community, including India, of course, can come up with in this kind of a situation?
You see, China has calibrated its response very carefully. As I said, most of the Middle East Muslim countries, Iran, Pakistan, Saudi, Algeria, Turkey, and Russia and other countries have openly come out in favor of China, and they have endorsed China's policies in Xinjiang. Central Asian republics also, they have endorsed China's policy in Xinjiang. Only 22 countries, they sent a joint letter last year to Human Rights Council, that is Britain, Germany, Australia, Canada, Japan, and others, condemning Chinese repression in Xinjiang, particularly the internment of over 1 million Uyghurs and other stringent measures. But I think it was 10 July 2012 when 22 countries gave their written statement and written letter to Council. On 12 July, 2019, 37 countries from Middle Eastern, Central Asian, and other countries, they gave another letter to Human Rights Council endorsing and supporting China's policy in Syria. So China has used its political and economic muscle and clout to bring around these countries to China's worldview. So they are very successful on the diplomatic front. And on the other front also, you see here in India, you see, because one intervention was what is the difference and what is the. Now I could say, in India, we shy away of using the term Islamic extremism or terrorism or something. We try to, because there is a reason, and that is valid reason, that we don't want to aggravate intra-community or Hindu-Muslim relations in this country. But in China is exaggerating the incidents of Islamic extremism and terrorism. If there is 5%, they are exaggerating it to 100% in order to legitimize their strict security and strong security measures in India. Whereas we shy away from talking about even the worst blasts and bomb blasts, hundreds have been killed, so much death and destruction has happened. But this is a major policy making difference, policy measure. In India, we take as a policy measure to control or to keep it under the carpet. No, we will manage this, everything is okay. But they aggravate it, they exaggerate it in order to enforce their strong policies in India and set the matter right. They also go into the organized settlement of funds in India. So here in Kashmir, you have 500,000 indigenous people who have lived there for 6,000 years. So they have been moved out. And Faragullah is saying that we don't want to live here, we want to go to China. So this is such things cannot happen
Right.
here.
Yes, Professor. Please go ahead. Yeah, you can ask the question. We have the
Thank
mic.
you. My name is Deva Mohanty, sir.
Achha.
I work on strategic and military affairs.
Okay.
I have studied Chinese military industry for some time,
Oh,
and it's very interesting, sir, as you pointed out, that they have two very intriguing policies which no other country follows. One is the sense of the long term. They always think in terms of long terms. So when they want to forcibly or otherwise assimilate disgruntled or minority groups, even if they take time, they will do that, and which they have been very, very systematically doing. The second one is the belief in salami slicing tactics in the borders. As you had pointed out, that they have put all those big tombs and mentioned all those things.
it is a physical, trying to create the physical evidence of Chinese ancient presence.
Ancient presence, which is very, very temporarily and very strategically implanted then and there. These are my observations. I do feel that when this kind of different types of minorities, including the Huis, which you refer to, they must be having growing dissent
Now
against the state.
Huis are now starting to listen now.
Right?
Huis,
Yes.
Hui Muslims. Earlier they were their preferred choice against Uyghurs. Now Huis are, because with growing education and exposure to other things,
And
Huis
now
are now.
when we see that what would be a state's response to such kind of issues, that the state will either appease them or will have a high-handed approach to quell their grievances and all that. being an authoritarian state, when they have been quelling them, Professor, do you foresee that a situation may come, because this is a digital age, you cannot isolate yourself from the whole world. You have to deal with the whole world. So the common people will be always exposed to the various nuances of modern life, and that will give them aspirations. And if that gives them aspirations, then that could turn into different types of dissent. So how are the Chinese likely to?
Chinese, I think, will manage, because they have managed at the diplomatic front. As I said, 22 Western Bloc, 22 countries against in Human Rights Council, and 30 they managed 37 member countries. Then they took a team of foreign ambassadors to Xinjiang in order to blunt the international Western criticism. They took from Russia, Venezuela, Cuba, and so many other places. They took some pro-Chinese foreign Western experts also on a conducted tour of Xinjiang. So they gave their reports covering them that this is very fantastic measures of counter-terrorism and to educate them, re-education programs. So they are managing, they are having comprehensive. It is not one-sided. We also tried to bring a team of European ambassadors to Kashmir.
Yes, sir. Yes,
You remember?
Yes.
But how did we do? Do you have any idea? We contacted and we did it through some NGO, Mali.
Yes.
Mali,
Some controversy.
we spied our nose because somebody is interested in something and somebody is.
We are bad at PR exercises.
No, it is not a PR. It was not PR. It was a. Mali was linked to somebody. They tried to do this, and I know everything.
We will carry on this discussion later. Okay, I think we have reached the end of this highly stimulating lecture. I'm highly thankful to Professor Varigu for being present here despite this difficult situation. And I thank all other participants who have joined us on the web for this lecture. We will continue our webinar series. I think we have the next lecture of the webinar series on the 1st of next month, that is Thursday, the day after tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.